Hey everyone, welcome. Today, we're going to break down a really crucial piece of environmental regulation, the Toxic Release Inventory, or TRI. It's a system that was actually born from tragedy, and it's designed to give communities real knowledge about the chemicals being used, sometimes right in their own backyards. So, let's dive in.
Here's the plan for our explainer. First, we're going to look at the why, the story behind the TRI's creation. Then, we'll untangle all those confusing acronyms. After that, we'll walk through a checklist to see who actually needs to report. Then, we'll cover how it's done. And finally, we'll wrap up with the latest updates you absolutely need to know about.
You know, to really get why the TRI is so important, you have to understand the events that made it happen. This wasn't just some idea that popped up in a committee meeting. No way. It was a necessary, direct response to a series of awful and preventable tragedies. This timeline, it's pretty stark, right? It all starts in 1984 with the horrible disaster in Bhopal, India, where thousands died. Then, just 1 year later, something scarily similar happened right here in the US, in West Virginia. These events really shook communities to their core, and people demanded transparency. So the government responded, and in 1986 they created the TRI, giving communities the legal right to know about the chemicals being used near them.
Okay, so let's tackle all those acronyms. It can feel like alphabet soup sometimes, right? But just think of TRI, SARA 313, and Form R as, well, different gears in the same machine. They all work together, but each one has its own specific job. So what is the Toxic Release Inventory at its heart? It's basically a public database, and that's huge. It means you, me, anyone with an internet connection can look up information on chemical releases from facilities in our own neighborhoods. It's a really powerful tool for community awareness. And here's how it all connects, nice and simple. SARA 313? That's the law, the specific rulebook that started it all. The TRI? That's the program itself, the whole system. And Form R? Well, that's the actual paperwork, the main form you fill out. So, one law, one program, one form. See? Not so complicated when you break it down. So, this is the big question, isn't it? Does this whole thing actually apply to your company? Well, it's not for every single business out there. And luckily, the EPA uses a pretty straightforward 3-part test to figure it all out.
All right, here's that test. Let's run through it. First up, employee count. Does your place have 10 or more full-time employees? Next, industry code. Does your business fall under one of the specific government codes? And finally, the big one, the chemical threshold. Are you making, processing, or even just using a chemical on the TRI list above a certain amount? If you're nodding your head and saying yes to all three, then TRI reporting is mandatory for you.
And that last point about the chemicals, that's a really big deal. We're talking about a list with around 770 different chemicals and chemical groups. But here's the thing you have to remember. This list is not set in stone. The EPA is constantly adding new substances as the science evolves. And what does that mean for you? It means your compliance duties can literally change from 1 year to the next. Okay, so you've gone through the checklist and you have to report. Now what? What does that actually look like? Well, the whole process really boils down to 2 main forms. You've got 2 choices, Form A or Form R. Think of Form A as the easy button, the short form. It's way simpler, but, and this is a big but, you can only use it if you meet some very specific criteria about the amount of chemical you use and the waste you generate. If you don't tick all those boxes, you've got no choice. You have to use the longer, much more detailed Form R. Okay, here are a few super important things to keep in mind. First, you have to fill out a separate form for each and every chemical that's over the limit. Not one form for everything, one for each. Second, you do it all online through the EPA's web portal. You also have to shoot copies over to your state, so don't forget that step. And maybe most importantly, once you hit submit, all that data becomes public information. You know, with any big regulation like this, things are never just static. The TRI is always evolving, and honestly, staying on top of the latest changes is absolutely crucial if you want to stay in compliance. Whoa, look at this number. In just one reporting year, a staggering 172 PFAS chemicals were added to the TRI list. You might know them as forever chemicals, because they just don't break down. This is a massive change, and it really shows you where the regulatory focus is right now. They're taking these compounds very, very seriously. And it didn't stop there. More recently, whole industries, like natural gas processing, were added to the reporting list. They tacked on 4 more PFAS chemicals, and they specifically called out certain sterilization facilities for their ethylene oxide use. The big takeaway here is pretty clear. You just can't assume that because you were exempt last year, you're still exempt this year. You gotta keep up. After digging through all the acronyms, the forms, and the constant updates, it's really worth taking a step back to remember this simple but powerful idea. This whole complicated system was built on a single principle, giving the public the information they need to understand what's happening in their own communities. So, we've covered the history, the definitions, and the practical steps. This explainer gives you the framework. So the final question is for you to think about. Is your company prepared to not only comply with the letter of the law, but also to embrace the spirit of transparency that the TRI represents?